Good evening. Russia's president has revealed his army fired an experimental ballistic missile at a military site in Ukraine. In a surprise national address, Vladimir Putin said the strike was in response to Kyiv's use of Western-supplied weapons to attack targets inside Russia. Describing it as a major step up in the war, Ukraine's president called on the international community for a strong response.
CCTV footage showing flashes of light above Dnipro in eastern Ukraine, the result of a hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile attack. Confirmation of the strike coming from Vladimir Putin, with a clear warning that his country would respond decisively in the event of an escalation of the conflict.
Ракеты атакуют цели со скоростью 10 махов. Это 2,5-3 километра в секунду. Современные, имеющиеся в мире системы противовоздушной обороны и создаваемые американцами системы противоракетной обороны в Европе подобные ракеты не перехватывают. Это исключено.
Russian social media sites carrying animation of the so-called multiple re-entry vehicles, where one missile releases multiple smaller warheads that detonate on impact. The Pentagon, too, confirming the strike while attempting to lower tensions.
We don't seek a wider regional conflict. We don't seek war with Russia. And I think we've been pretty clear about that from this podium and from this administration.
The White House less reticent about who to blame for the escalating hostilities.
The escalation at every turn, at every step, is coming from Russia. They're the ones who are escalating this. They're the ones who started this war. It is because of their aggression into a sovereign territory, Ukraine.
A view echoed from Kyiv, where air raid sirens warn people of impending missile attacks.
Сьогодні ж наш божевільний сусід вкотре показав, який він насправді, як він зневажає і гідність, і свободу, і взагалі життя людей. І як він боїться. Боїться настільки, що застосовує вже нові ракети.
The Ukrainian president calling on the international community to respond to what he described as a major step up in the scale and brutality of the war. Ukraine's Air Force initially claimed Russia had fired a longer-range intercontinental ballistic missile at Dnipro, a claim they later walked back from. But the repercussions of Moscow's new tactics in Ukraine leaving some analysts in no doubt.
Really signalling to the West, we're happy to enter into a competition around intermediate-range ballistic missiles. P.S. These could be nuclear-tipped. Do you really want to take that risk? And so there's a degree of, if you like, fear-mongering.
A fear all too palpable on the front lines of this war. Edmund Roy, SBS World News.
The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the country's former defense minister Yoav Gallant, and a Hamas leader for alleged war crimes relating to the Gaza war. It's the first time that leaders of a democracy and Western-aligned state have been charged by the court.
Israel's Prime Minister and former Defence Minister now internationally wanted. The ICC decision citing reasonable grounds to believe they bear criminal responsibility for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution and other inhumane acts. The Prime Minister's office blasting what it says are false and absurd charges.
בית הדין הבינלאומי בהאג, שהוקם כדי להגן על האנושות, הפך היום לאויב האנושות. זוהי פשיטת רגל מוסרית. היא פוגעת בזכותן הטבעית של הדמוקרטיות להגן על עצמן מפני טרור רצחני.
Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, defended by Israelis from across the political spectrum, who say the ICC move is an anti-Semitic act. Former War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz said it was moral blindness and a shameful stain of historic proportion, while the Israeli opposition leader said the warrants reward terrorism. The Israeli PM says ICC prosecutor Karim Khan is trying to extricate himself from accusations of sexual misconduct. He denies the allegations. US President Joe Biden has called the ICC announcement outrageous. The US is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court.
We fundamentally reject that the ICC has jurisdiction over this situation.
Human rights experts say the ICC is justified in its actions.
The affirmation of the arrest warrants is appropriate recognition that the way the Israeli government has been fighting the war in Gaza has been by pursuing a war crime strategy.
Palestinians also welcoming the ICC move.
اليوم فاتحة أمل جديدة ونافذة جديدة لما يتعلق بوقف هذه الحرب العدوانية والإجرامية من خلال قطع الطريق على مسار هذه الجرائم ومحاكمة مسؤولي الجرائم عن هذه الحرب.
The court also issuing a third arrest warrant for Hamas military commander Mohammed Deif, accused of rape, torture and murder. Israel says he was killed in an IDF airstrike in July. 124 countries are signatories to the ICC. Several nations have said they respect and could act on the warrants, further isolating Israel. It could also complicate efforts to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza, where, according to the local health ministry, more than 20 Palestinians were killed in the latest IDF airstrikes. Rochelle Harrison-Pless, SBS World News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has accused the United States of escalating tensions, warning the risk of nuclear war is at its highest level yet. During a speech at a military exhibition in Pyongyang, he said negotiations with Washington showed the US had aggressive and hostile policies against the country. He also called for developing and upgrading weaponry. And Brazil's federal police have indicted former President Jair Bolsonaro and some of his closest allies. They're accused of being involved in an attempted coup to keep Mr. Bolsonaro in office after he was defeated in the 2022 elections. Police say it's part of an investigation into what they're calling an attempt to violently dismantle the constitutional state. COP29 in Azerbaijan is due to end tomorrow, but negotiations have so far failed to agree on how much developing nations will get to finance their green energy transition. Accusations also of some countries refusing to accept last year's COP conclusions.
Working overtime, delegates at the UN's climate talks unable to agree on a number considered key to combating climate change.
I'm really sorry to say, but the text we now have in front of us, in our view, is imbalanced, unworkable and unacceptable.
The lack of progress infuriating developing nations.
There is not a clear quantum defined by donors. So we are negotiating on nothing.
Under the 2015 Paris Agreement, developed nations agreed to help fund poorer countries move away from fossil fuels. Throughout the summit, delegates reported hearing figures between $200 to $600 billion offered by wealthy nations. But some independent experts say at least $1 trillion is needed by the year 2030 to fund the transition to clean energy. With the summit wrapping up, the amount donors are willing to pay still unknown.
We keep hearing that $1 trillion provision goal is unreasonable. Today, trillions in subsidies support fossil fuels. This should outrage us all. We cannot afford to keep saying we must deal with the problem and then fail to do so.
Wealthy nations say they shouldn't bear the brunt alone.
We have to know what is the actual structure that is applying here. And I don't believe the presidency have provided that structure.
The UN Secretary-General calling for compromise.
Soften hard lines, navigate the path through your differences and keep your eyes on the bigger picture.
Leaders also expressing frustration with host nation Azerbaijan over concerns the draft caters to oil-producing Arab countries and so-called like-minded developing countries, including Saudi Arabia, China and India.
You don't want to be pointing fingers, but we all know that there has been a backsliding. There has been an attempt to interpret what we agreed last year as a menu.
Developing countries accusing wealthier nations of backtracking too.
For God's sakes, what's the next stop? Mars? Do we need to go to outer space to get a quantitative number from our developed countries to be able to start negotiating here?
Analysts say the imminent change in US government also hampering negotiations, with nations wary of the incoming Trump administration. Hannah Kwon, SBS World News.
Former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his bid for U.S. Attorney General over illicit drug and sexual misconduct allegations. President-elect Donald Trump has been quick to choose a replacement, naming Pam Bondi, a former Florida prosecutor, as his choice to head up the nation's Justice Department.
President-elect Trump announcing his new nomination for Attorney General Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, after Matt Gaetz dropped out. 24 hours ago, Gaetz was sounding confident.
They've been going great. Senator's been giving me a lot of good advice. I'm looking forward to a hearing. Folks have been very supportive.
Gaetz bowing out of the nominee shortly after speaking to Trump late this morning. His nomination rocked by allegations he used drugs and paid young women for sex, including a 17-year-old, which Gaetz strenuously denies. Gaetz sharing in a statement in part, "It is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition." Shortly after, Trump posted his own statement saying, "I greatly appreciate the recent efforts of Matt Gaetz in seeking approval to be Attorney General. He was doing very well, but at the same time, did not want to be a distraction for the administration." Senators in both parties weighing in.
I think there was a widespread sense of this was a positive development for the confirmation process.
There's a sense of relief about it, of course. I think he did a pretty noble thing, frankly. Honorable thing by getting out himself.
Meantime, Trump's pick for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, an Army veteran and weekend Fox News anchor, battling his own controversy regarding allegations he committed sexual assault in 2017. Hegseth told police what happened in the hotel that night was consensual.
The matter was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared, and that's where I'm leaving.
But according to a police report, the case was forwarded to the local district attorney for review and possible prosecution. Hegseth was never charged with the crime. His attorney says he later paid a settlement to the woman to keep her from going public with the allegations because he feared it would hurt his career as a television anchor.